it's Fred and Sheila McCoy at the Hatfield McCoy Museum in Liberty, Kentucky. FredMcCoy.com or HatfieldsMcCoysMuseum.com. This is going to be another segment of Keeping It Real. Everybody knows by now that keeping it real is where we've heard something, seen something, somebody told us something, we read something, and especially may have seen something on YouTube or TikTok that drew our attention to a story that's maybe incorrect, not true, or completely made up. So today we're going to discuss James McCoy and Floyd McCoy, two monuments or two historical markers that were put up in their honor in 2018. And I want to show you how easy it is for history to get changed, for history to get rewritten, and how stories can go on and on. And you know, the thing is, we're going to correct this story, but these historical markers in Catlettsburg are going to be there forever and ever. And everybody that sees them is not going to see this video. So when they read these markers, they're going to think, well, it's on a historical marker, has to be the truth. And it couldn't be further from the truth. And that's how history has changed throughout the years. And Devil Ance's offspring has really helped to change that. I don't know how people can allow it, especially it seems like some of the McCoys with the McCoy name, people just want to get in the newspaper. They just want to be able to have their name out there or have something to do with the Hatfield McCoy feud. And so they'll say anything, they'll do anything, they'll sign anything, they'll act like they're a part of something that really they're not even a part of. They've just included them in to have that McCoy name. And again, I'm Hatfield and McCoy, so I wish I was actually a Hatfield and I could do this on the other side, so you would see that it's just not right no matter which family you are. Let me go over this historical marker. April the 15th of 2018, the newspaper said, the morning was filled with historical stories. Some of the most interesting were relayed by William Keith Hatfield, a Hatfield family descendant who came from Oklahoma for Friday's ceremony. Some of the Hatfield's remarks included, this man wants to be so famous, so fast, and so well known that he lives in Oklahoma. He's got the Hatfield name and a descendant of Tennis Hatfield, if I ain't mistaken, which is he would have been the cousin to Stephen Hatfield, our friend, because Tennis Hatfield was also Stephen's grandfather. Thing about Stephen, the difference in Stephen Hatfield and the rest of the Hatfields that I've noticed, the stories come from, Stephen didn't care. He was like Fred McCoy. Stephen would tell you something, let it chips fall where they may. It didn't matter if it was good or bad. He told us about Tennis burning his house down, putting all the relics and stuff out in the barn or out in the root cellar or wherever and hiding things. And he just didn't care. He would tell the good, the bad, and the ugly. And anybody that knows Tennis, and I know there's people out there, not Tennis, but Stephen. I'm bad for that. Sheila's corrected me a lot.
That's all right.
Made a video the other night on that cabin some of you may have seen. And I said we got him. See how many of you caught this?
Here you go.
We're going to correct ourselves. Sheila was laughing at me because I said every evening we got 5 buckets of coal in from my grandparents. We got 3 buckets of lump coal and 3 buckets of slack coal. Well, that reminds me of that joke where that guy said 2 and 2 equals 5, and you said, yeah, you got to carry the 1.
Yeah.
So
that's all right.
But anyway, Stephen, anybody that's ever talked to Stephen knows the type of person he was and what I'm referring to. What we're talking about nowadays between William Keith, Rio Hatfield, I forget the other one's name, from Tazewell, Virginia, and it just seems people would do anything to get in the news or on the newspaper in the history books. Anyway, let me continue, and you can decide. Historical marker 2547 commemorates the final resting place of James H. and Floyd McCoy in the Catlettsburg Cemetery. The marker was dedicated April 13th, 2018. William Hatfield says, when the boys were shot, tied up to the pawpaw bushes, Big Jim was right across the river, hoping that something would intervene and that it wouldn't happen. But he wouldn't intervene. He knew about mountain justice. He knew Devil Anse was going to do what he thought was right and just. But he listened over there, and when the shots went off, it hurt him so bad. He lost 3 of his brothers. And here's, really? And she's going to post this board on there just in case she don't, or something happens.
And
sometimes
you can bring it up so they can see the bottom
sometimes,
of it. I'll try to remember to take a picture of it. And
sometimes things don't come through like you would hope that they do.
Yeah.
And you may not even be able to see that. I don't know.
I can see it pretty good from this side, so.
Does anyone really believe this BS? Do I really have to comment about this statement? It's okay, I will anyway. Jim was right across the river, meaning in West Virginia, as the boys were killed in Kentucky. So what William Keith Hatfield wants us to believe is that Jim McCoy, who lived at Blackberry Fort, now known as Hardy, Kentucky, he lived at Hardy, but he was across the river when the boys were being murdered, and didn't do anything. He knew Devil Anse was going to do what he thought was right and just. What kind of mind does that tell you that Devil Anse had if he thinks being right and just is stripping 3 men down, or boys, one of them at least a boy, stripping them down naked and killing them. One of them completely innocent. Right and just. See, the Hatfields have always, or West Virginia Hatfields, or more specifically, Devil Anse descendants. Now, you got to go back to Devil Anse. You got to go back to all the years and all the photos and all the stories of Devil Anse out on his porch with his children, with his guns, with his rifles. You've got to go back to all the stories that was told and to where this stuff comes from. This was passed down. We eventually hope to see some DNA from a lot of Hatfields, because there's been some allegations that some Hatfields are not actually Hatfields. And the only way to see that is through DNA. But as of yet, we can't get the DNA from children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren to track it back. When are we going to do that? When are we going to see that? But I'm going to tell you, this is a good characterization of something that would show or tend to show that they're actually related to Devil Anse because of these tall tales that they tell. Now, he's referring to right across the river because of statements Thomas Dodson has made in his book and spoken or written into history. Right across the river is where Asa McCoy lived, that Tom Dodson thought or wanted people to believe was Asa McCoy, who was married to Preacher Anse Hatfield's daughter. However, because so many mountaineer families renamed their children after loved ones, it can be confusing. There was an Asa McCoy that lived on the West Virginia side. Asa McCoy, and he was the brother to Sarah McCoy, my great-great-grandfather, Uriah McCoy. He was also the father to Selkirk McCoy. If you remember Selkirk McCoy, that's the one that jumped ship at the pig trial and voted for the Hatfields. Now, do you really think that at that time the Kentucky McCoys and the West Virginia McCoys, which worked for Devil Anse Hatfield, were friends, and that Jim McCoy from Kentucky would have been sitting on the porch of West Virginia McCoy Asa? That's the common sense tells you that didn't happen. I mean, sometimes this feud is not hard to figure out. The documents and different things help us, but sometimes you just got to use common sense and say, does that make sense? and it doesn't. Selkirk, his sons, Asa, McCoy, they all worked and were friends with Devil Anse Hatfield in West Virginia. This Asa McCoy actually owned property with Devil Anse Hatfield. But this is not the Asa McCoy that was married to Nancy Hatfield, Preacher Anse's daughter. That Asa McCoy was actually my great-grandfather. And this is not the Asa McCoy that was called Asa Harmon that was killed in 1865 by Devil Anse and Jim Vance. Let's go on. But Tom Dodson wrote that into history, saying that Asa McCoy was in business, and he's trying, in his book, he was trying to refer to Asa McCoy from Blackberry. William says, but he wouldn't interfere. He knew about mountain justice. He knew Devil Anse was going to do what he thought was right and just. Going to do what he thought was right and just. See how the Devil Anse Hatfield fan club always wants to throw a plug in there for old Devil Anse. What he thought was right, laughable. What kind of mind would make 3 men strip down and then shoot them, just like we said earlier? This monument reads, here lies James H. McCoy, oldest son of Randall and Sarah, last living McCoy feudist before passing away in 1929. He was a peacemaker in the feud and tried to talk Frank Phillips out of killing Jim Vance and Bill Dempsey. Here's Jim McCoy, which is the oldest son of Randall McCoy. Now Jim McCoy, I'm not going to read all these. You can read this, and it will tell you. A person come in here a couple weeks ago, and she said, quit reading.
Yeah, that was Annette.
Quit reading. I don't like when you read. Just tell the story. Well, I want to get this stuff right, or I'll have to correct myself.
Hi, Annette.
So sometimes I have to read in order to stay online, or so I don't repeat. But he says that Jim was a peacemaker. Now this is William Keith Hatfield saying this. Jim was a peacemaker and tried to talk Frank Phillips out of killing Jim Vance and Bill Dempsey. Jim McCoy actually put at least one of the rounds in Jim Vance that day at Thacker. Him, Bud McCoy, and Frank Phillips, all three shot Jim Vance. I don't think there's any doubt as to who actually killed him, because they said Frank Phillips there at the end was pretty brutal. But do you all believe that Jim McCoy, Randall's oldest son, who had buried 3 of his younger brothers, who had watched William die, froze to death, mourning Randall Jr. because he took his stead? Are we to believe that during the feud he was trying to have peace? Jim McCoy was actually in the posse. Now, Jim McCoy was the first one in 1888, January. He just lived up the road from Randall McCoy. He lived on their property, the 300 acres that Randall and Sarah owned. So that he was the first one to them when he heard the gunfire and saw the cabin burning. Jim McCoy's the first one there. Are we to believe that Jim McCoy shows up, there's 2 more of his siblings, his brother and his sister dead? His mother's beat half senseless, half dead? Are we to believe that Jim McCoy wanted peace? Let's have peace. Are we to believe that? If you believe that, the old saying about oceanfront property in Arizona, because you don't believe that, not for 1 minute, unless you're instilled with that thought, and that's just the way you grew up, and you can't, Devil Anse can't do no wrong, and you can believe whatever you want, but you're not believing the truth. He was a peacemaker during the feud. He was not during the feud. Look at the picture. Here's Jim McCoy. Here's Jim McCoy down here when him and Tennis Hatfield met in Pikeville. Look how old that man is. Look how old when they met in Pikeville. That's an old man there. That's not the young man from the 60s 70s and 80s, 1880s, that watched his brothers and sisters get killed. That's an old man there. That's years and years and years later. But this is actually on the monument here. During the feud years, at least 1882 to 1890, Jim McCoy was not known as a peacemaker. Once again, a phrase or comment that has been written or spoken into history. Jim McCoy, along with his brother Tolbert, were both Pike County deputy sheriffs in the early 1800s. They were two of those who had arrested Chauncey Hatfield as he snuck across the Tug River from West Virginia to see Rosanna when she was staying with Aunt Betty. This was when Rosanna went and got Devil Anse, and Devil Anse come and rescued Chauncey. And again, not going to go into the stories that's been told over the years on what Devil Anse did or didn't do after he called up to the Kentucky lawman, as I wasn't there, or Sheila and I wasn't.
Right.
But there's all kinds of stories, and they're stories. A story, well, we're going to go over that in a minute from Webster's Dictionary, but a story can be an imaginary story or it can be a real story, but half of the feud stories seems to be on the imaginary level. Jim McCoy was the first person to get to the cabin.
You said that.
Common sense, peacemaker. Jim McCoy was alive and well when Devil Anse, Wall, Cap, Ellis, and Cotton Top Hatfield and the others assassinated his offspring. You know, let's read the historical marker. Oldest son of Randall and Sarah, last living McCoy feudist before passing away in 1929. He was a peacemaker in the feud and tried to talk Frank Phillips out of killing Jim Vance and Bill Dempsey. In 1928, James and Tennis Hatfield, youngest son of Devil Anse, met in Pikeville, Kentucky and called a formal truce between the families. Now, they want you to believe here, they want you to believe on this historical marker that after they killed the three McCoy boys, and none of them's brought to justice, and Randall's complaining, trying to get justice, trying to get them extradited back to Kentucky, that finally in 1888, they burned a cabin down and killed two more. They want you to believe that the next day when Frank Phillips showed up and half of Pond Creek and half of Peter Creek and half of Blackberry showed up, and they were fed up. We've had enough. Randall McCoy's been through enough. And they joined that posse. They joined several posses. It wasn't just one posse. They split up. They all went in different directions. Some went to Make Creek, some went to Grapevine, to Thacker. So they went different places looking for this bunch. But we're to believe, because this marker says it, we're to believe that Jim Vance only went along on that posse with Frank Phillips.
Jim McCoy, you said Jim Vance.
Thank you, babe. Thank you. That Jim McCoy only went with that posse with Frank Phillips and his father, Randall McCoy, so he could keep the peace. So he could make sure that nobody else was hurt. Do you believe that? This man just seen his mother beat half to death and two more dead, but he went on that posse, is what he says in this story. And I'm going to make sure that she takes a picture of this so you can read this entire story, because I'm sure I'm going to miss some of it.
Yeah.
But now that's what it says. And I wrote here, written or spoken into history, was this comment by William Hatfield. He, meaning Jim McCoy, hooked up with Frank Phillips and a posse at the Battle of Grapevine Creek. He was part of that, and he was there to stop Frank Phillips from doing damage to innocent people. Now that's what William Keith Hatfield said. He said that. Now remember, he said this in 2018. 2018 is when he made this statement. Not 1888, but 2018, by somebody that wasn't there, that's from Oklahoma, and that's a Devil Anse fan. Devil Anse could do no wrong to them. And once again, plugging Devil Anse. Hello, it's Fred and Sheila McCoy. Sheila's behind the camera.
Hi.
We're at the Hatfield McCoy Museum in Liberty, Kentucky. FredMcCoy.com, Hatfield's McCoysMuseum.com. This is going to be part 2 of the video that we started discussing the historical markers in Ashland, Kentucky, Catlettsburg, on James and Floyd McCoy. It's going to be a follow-up. We're going to try to join right in where we left off. And it was talking about how historical markers, they should be more careful before they make these things, because can be confusing and to people, because they automatically think that because it's on a historical marker that is the truth. We done went over James's, and she's going to post the board. I didn't go over everything, but you can read it for yourself if you're interested. You know, the thing about these videos that I make, the ones that I do correcting things, Sheila said a while ago, said, try not to read so much, because a lady had come in here and said, don't read so much. Well, my part here, I hope you understand, my part here is not to look good, sound good. That's not my purpose here. My purpose, or my goal, is to correct some of the things that's been said or been done. That's my purpose, because nobody else has spoke up over the years, and it looks like if somebody don't speak up, it's just going to get worse. So my purpose in reading or anything else, you don't have to watch me read, or just listen to what we're saying. And because I wrote it down so I would have it correct. I wrote it down so I wouldn't make the same mistakes or give you some information that's not correct or true and be part of the problem instead of the solution. So
you're quoting what they
So when I read things, again, I'm not trying to have the best video out there. I'm trying to have the most informative video so you can look at and get your mind, get you thinking about this, and then you look at it and you read it and you think to yourself, wait a minute, that's making sense. I believe this, or I don't believe it. If you don't believe it, fine. You know, all I can do is tell you. Let's read Floyd Hatfield's. Here lies Floyd McCoy.
I was going to say.
Thank you. Let's read Floyd McCoy's. Son of Randall and Sarah McCoy had dinner with his brothers, Tolbert, Palmer, and Randolph Jr. after their arrest for stabbing and shooting Ellison Hatfield in 1882. The next day, Floyd witnessed his brothers being captured by Wall Hatfield and taken to West Virginia. Wall said if Ellison died, McCoy brothers would be killed. Now that's on a historical marker. I want to come back to this one in a minute, but let's go to that statement there. This board here is an old board. If you'll go back to Wall Hatfield, Sheila and I did one way back on Wall Hatfield. I'm not going to cover this whole board, but I want to read this to you because we corrected this then, and that's before we even seen these markers. Great-grandson of Valentine Wall Hatfield still searching for answers. Russell Hatfield of Tazewell, Virginia. That's Russell Hatfield that said that his great-grandfather there was completely innocent. Didn't do nothing wrong. Didn't do nothing wrong. But yet he was sent to prison, and he was put in cells with McCoys and was killed. Wall was. Go watch that video if you want to see what happened to Wall and so forth. There's no need in going over it.
That's right.
But let's look at this. Now, Russell Hatfield says that Wall Hatfield didn't do nothing wrong. He was innocent. This historical marker that they got their story from William Keith Hatfield says Wall Hatfield, they was taken captive by Wall Hatfield to West Virginia, and Wall said if Ellison dies, the McCoy brothers would die. And that's what happened. Ellison died. The 3 McCoys died. Wall Hatfield was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison. He actually died in prison. So he did life in prison. Back to William Hatfield. William Hatfield said, they loved Aunt Sally, as they called Sarah. Hatfields and McCoys lived together for a long time and got along great. Now we're to believe that after 1863, when Devil Anse deserted in the Civil War, and him and Randall had hard feelings because Randall's taken POW. And then 2 years later, when they kill Randall's brother, Asa Harmon, we're to believe that a few years later, when they stole the pig, 78, we're to believe that in 82, when they killed the 3 McCoy boys, and then again in 88, when they burnt the cabin and beat Sarah, we're to believe that William Hatfield says that they loved Aunt Sally. They almost loved her to death, looks like, as they called her Sarah. Hatfields and McCoys had lived together for a long time and got along great. Says they loved Jim McCoy, and Jim McCoy was always a peacemaker. Well, New Year's Raid, 1888, Daniel Witt's testimony. Now this story here, he does a segment for Logan Banner, this guy does. I'm not going to plug him, it's irrelevant, because half of what he writes is nonsense, but he's a West Virginian, and he's a Devil Anse backer, and so you can count on that. That's understandable, but it's not the truth. But let's go here. William Keith says they love Jim McCoy, the oldest son. Let's see how much they loved him. This is the story of the New Year's Raid, and who was your captain? Jim Vance. What was the purpose of getting together? They claimed the purpose was to get out of the way of the Kentucky authorities. What else did they claim? When I left them, we came to Henry Mitchell's to get dinner. They wouldn't let me hear what they had talked about. Cap asked me if I was going to Kentucky with them. So they were going to Kentucky to kill Randolph McCoy and Jim McCoy and settle this racket. Really? Now, William Hatfield in 2018, that statement there was taken years later, but at least it's closer to the time of and a witness of what took place when Cap was getting everybody together, him and Jim Vance, to go to the McCoys. But we're to believe in 2018 that William Hatfield says, oh, Jim McCoy was a peacemaker. Jim McCoy meant well. He was making sure nobody got hurt. But this man right here that was there is saying that Cap told them they were going to kill Randall McCoy and Jim McCoy. There's other stories where they were going to kill the whole family, because Sarah McCoy was also a witness. She had gone to the
Schoolhouse.
Warm Holler up there in Matewan and seen her visit her 3 boys.
Yeah.
And that's when they told them, said, if we'll be bringing the boys back to Kentucky to you. And they did bring them back. They brought them back and shot them. But that goes to the part of reading Floyd McCoy's document. New Year's Day, Randolph McCoy had escaped. The Hatfields were rounded up by bounty hunter. Let's go over this. Bounty hunter, Frank Phillips. This story's talking about bounty hunter, Frank Phillips. Where did bounty hunter come from? When was Frank Phillips a bounty hunter? Frank Phillips collected bounty. Remember, Walt Hatfield says, you'll not collect no bounty from me, that he was turning himself in. But yet, we've got the document right there, and it's on the Walt Hatfield video. We've got the document where they actually paid Frank Phillips $100 bounty for bringing Walt Hatfield in. He arrested him and brought him in. So Walt didn't turn himself in. Selkirk in the newspaper and even Cotton Top actually state that Frank Phillips, the Kentucky people, come there and arrested them and brought them back to Kentucky. So nobody turned themselves in. Frank Phillips went and got them. Now, Frank Phillips, a bounty hunter, does that make you a bounty hunter because you collect the bounty that's out on somebody? Frank Phillips had statewide authority by Governor Simon Buckner and was told to go get the Hatfields and bring them to justice. That's what he did. He wasn't there as a bounty hunter. He was there as an appointed officer of the governor of Kentucky. So when you see bounty hunter on Frank Phillips, that's like he's not a bounty hunter. That man was actually a state officer. During the feud, James McCoy tried the hardest to act as a peacemaker and put an end to the fighting. He tried to dissuade Frank Phillips from killing Jim Vance. That's just that over again.
Yeah.
Witnesses Walt Hatfield kidnapped him. The feud over a century ago in Mingo County and Pike County, Kentucky. She's going to take a picture of this and let you read this again, and you can see for yourself.
I'll put it at the end of the video.
Coverage began, and the Hatfields portrayed to the nation as backwoods, violent hillbillies. Up to this point, the infamous family feud was still unknown on the national level. However, that changed when lawyer Perry Klein, husband of Martha Klein, had the charges of murder of the McCoy brothers reinstated against the Hatfields and ultimately put a bounty on their heads. At this time, media coverage of the feud began, and the Hatfields were portrayed to the nation as backwoods, violent hillbillies. The feud came to a head January 1st, 1888. Let's read this first line once again. I want to clarify something. Now, this is an author, and they're writing about why the warrants were issued. Up to this point, the family feud was still unknown to the national level. However, that changed when the lawyer Perry Klein's husband of Martha Klein, had the charges of murder for the McCoy brothers reinstated against the Hatfields. Reinstated. Think about that. Listen to that word. They had the murder charges reinstated. When was the murder charges ever instated? When was the murder charges ever dismissed? When Devil Anse and Cap Hatfield went to their graves, they still had indictment warrants from Kentucky on murder charges of the three McCoy boys. And Cap on murder charges with the cabin massacre related to Calvin and Alifair. When were they reinstated? An indictment, they were indicted in September, I think it was, of the same year that they killed, 1882, that they killed the three McCoy boys. They were indicted. Once you're indicted until that case is dismissed, not guilty. Guilty, you're serving your time. But the indictment doesn't just go away, and you definitely don't have to reinstate. So Simon Buckner didn't reinstate nothing. Simon Buckner merely, because of the Pike County officials, the county attorneys, Commonwealth attorneys, and various people that had complained because Randall McCoy had been waiting justice for all those years, he finally put the reward on there and sent the governor's warrant to West Virginia to say, hey, send those guys over here. We want to try them for murder. And the last comment, I'll be quiet here. At this time, media coverage of the feud began, and the Hatfields were portrayed to the nation as backwoods, violent hillbillies. Really? At this time? At this time, Devil Anse was portrayed as hillbilly. He was the first person ever called a hillbilly in the United States. That's the word came from hillbilly, from hills, and Billy from William Anderson Hatfield. He was a hillbilly, and that's where the name started from. And it started in 1888 when T.C. Crawford visited Devil Anse Hatfield. He talked to Devil Anse, he talked to Cap, he talked to the family members.
He stayed there for a week?
He come there to stay a day, and he ended up a week or so. Yeah. And there's a video on it. There's a video with quotes right out of his book of what he felt about the Hatfields, West Virginia Hatfields. Now, once again, I'm not taking up for Randall McCoy. There's nothing to take up. He didn't say nothing yay or nay. He didn't give an interview. He didn't talk. Man had done lost half of his family. He wasn't going around here trying to seek media coverage. The man's in mourning. So you can't blame Randall McCoy with the Hatfield brand. The only people T.C. Crawford talked to was Devil Anse Hatfield and his family. And then he didn't only write the newspaper articles, he had enough to write a book.
Mm-hmm. He wrote a book.
All right. This is William Keith Hatfield that flew or drove, whatever, all the way from Oklahoma, to put his hand on that sign and say, hey, I'm a part of history. I helped put this up here. I'm a part of history. And forever, and that's the one that said that Devil Anse meant well and he was going to do what was just and right. But this is people that want him and Rio Hatfield that signed a peace treaty, but yet makes one of the awful stories up about Hubert Bay McCoy, an innocent man that was killed by his grandfather, shot in the back, but yet they're in the newspaper, they're on all these historical sites, they're with Pike County Tourism, and it's totally, it's almost unthinkable. And there's more to come. There's going to be more of this, but there he is. He's usually got his Bible with him in his videos and stuff. He usually carries his Bible. His trademark's his sunglasses. And but that's the one that made all these comments that says that Jim Vance, and he's over here a magician, moving the right hand by the left hand's making the magic. And that's what he's doing. He's sitting there speaking this stuff into history that Jim McCoy was wanted to stop in the middle of the feud and have peace. Jim McCoy didn't have peace till he's an old man. And in fact, he died the year after. Him and Tennis Hatfield got together in 1928.
28, he died in 29.
He died in 29 the following year.
Yeah.
There he is. Here he is. That's Randall McCoy's oldest son. That's my grandfather. That's Philip McCoy.
They look a lot alike.
Sure they do. Now, Philip McCoy was also his great-grandfather would have been, no, sorry, not his great-grandfather. His grandfather was Preacher Anse Hatfield. Mm-hmm. His mother was Nancy McCoy. I don't know. I may be beating a dead horse on some of these videos. I don't mean to. Some of it, as historians or family, Hatfield McCoy family, right. We've researched it all of our lives, and some of this stuff is so. Reach me that picture there behind you on the wall. That's right there, please. That just happens to be there. I want to show. There is the two peace treaties. One in 1928 and one in 1976. Both of them involved Jim McCoy's. Now, there are two different Jim McCoy's. James McCoy. Actually, this is Randall McCoy's son, Jim McCoy. And this James McCoy was named after, namesake of this Jim McCoy. This is Tennis Hatfield, Devil Anse's youngest son. And in 1976, this is Willis Hatfield, Devil Anse's only living son. Now, those were the two peace treaties that mattered. Those were the two that was members of both families, that was related right there to it. But yet in 2003, we had to have another peace treaty when the World Trade Centers was blown up. We had to come together and say, hey, we want Hatfields and McCoys joined together. Nothing but a publicity stunt. Yeah. And half the stories that's said is how long is it?
19.
Okay, I'm going to stop it there. I'm going to stop it. I just wish people would could understand my passion for the truth.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say. Your passion.
The truth. That's all Sheila and I want is the truth. You can't put things on historical markers and expect these stories not to go on for the rest of our lives. For the rest of our lives, this story here where Jim McCoy was trying to get peace the whole time when he's actually on the posse and actually one of the guys that helped shoot Jim Vance. Now, the only person that shot, what was it, Frank Dempsey, is it? Bill Dempsey.
Bill Dempsey.
The only person that shot Bill Dempsey was Frank Phillips, of course. And he was in the Hatfield posse. He was trying to keep them from arresting them at that time. So it was anyway, it's Fred and Sheila McCoy. She's motioning for me to move on, move on. And
Sorry.
that's okay. I don't, the thing about it is, y'all can turn these videos off at any time.
Yeah.
If I get boring to you, turn it off. I'm sorry to beat dead horses, but I want this to stand one day. She's going to have this little drive, whether it's on YouTube or not. It will always be there. And you don't have to take it for the truth. Take it for what it is and research it. Investigate it and use common sense in a lot of this stuff. And you'll come up with the same thing we did. Thank you. Catch you next time.
Please like and subscribe. Bye.